Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Mel Sodedze, reporting live for duty from Unique Speaker Bureau International. Welcome to another Spark Shift Succeed, where we bring global solutions to local problems. This isn't just another session, it is an invested conversation, a gathering designed to anchor transformation, to ignite curiosity, and to remind us that success is not a destination, but a journey shaped by the questions we dare to ask. Wherever you may be, whether driving to your next meeting, making a cup of coffee, or preparing for your quarterly review, I want you to think of this session as tuning into a frequency of possibility. Spark Shift Succeed is about creating a space where ideas collide, where perspectives expand, and where we walk away not just informed but transformed. And transformation is exactly what our speaker embodies. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Jane Gunn. Known globally as a barefoot mediator, Jane is an internationally acclaimed mediator and author who has advised corporations, spoken at the United Nations, and written extensively on building cultures of collaboration. With a background in law and a career dedicated to helping leaders navigate conflict and complexity, Jane brings a voice of clarity and wisdom to the noise of our times. Today, Jane will be guiding us through a theme that could not be more relevant: critical thinking in business and in life. In a world that often rewards speed over depth, Jane reminds us that the real power lies in pausing, questioning, and thinking differently. Please join me in welcoming the extraordinary Jane Gunn. Jane, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I love the fact that you use the words curiosity and journey, because those are two words that I'm going to be repeating in this presentation today. And the question I want to open with is, do you dare to think deeply, differently, and dangerously? Because would it interest you to know that even most of us think that we are thinking critically, but in fact we are not. And so critical thinking in critical times is the theme that we of today, and something that I think we all need to anchor to be able to get through the crazy times, as we were saying before I went on air, that we're living in. And I'm in the middle of mediating. So I'm a mediator. I mediate legal disputes, very large and complex disputes. I'm in the middle of one now, which is between two founders of large companies. They're intelligent, intellectual, well-versed business people, but they both see this situation, despite the same emails, this being in the same meetings, seeing the same documents, from completely different perspectives. So they are what I would say, and we will return to, on completely different islands. So as introduced, I'm Jane Gunn, the Barefoot Mediator, and I think that the skills and the tools and the mindset of mediation is something that all of us could use in the times that we're in today. So I'm going to walk you through the journey that I take my clients on when we're going through a complex mediation, and show you how you can apply the skills, the tools, and the thinking in the world that you're in, and the challenges that you have to face today. So I recorded a podcast recently with a colleague called Peter, and he was asking this question: do you, or did you used to believe in the tooth fairy? The answer for most of us is yes, absolutely. But why did you believe in the tooth fairy? Well, the answer is because a trusted authority. My parents told me. Also, I had social proof. Other people, I mean, most of the other people in my peer group believed in the tooth fairy. And finally, I had actual proof. Under my pillow in the morning was a coin instead of the tooth that I left there. But was it true? No, it wasn't true. And so there is a gap sometimes between certainty, which our brain loves, and curiosity. So the question is then, how do we bring critical thinking? Critical thinking is really asking ourselves, what else could be true? What information am I missing? And am I reacting to the facts and the story, or am I searching more deeply? In the boardroom, for example, and any meeting that you may have been in, it's very easy to do what I call go with the flow, to follow herd mentality. The alternative, of course, is herd mentality. With herd mentality, we're in the group think. We're asking, do we all agree with this? Is everybody on? And the most powerful person in the boardroom in the meeting can obviously persuade or influence and manipulate others. And sometimes we fear speaking up. Herd mentality, on the other hand, asks, whose voice is it that we haven't yet heard? And so, again, being able to pause, being able to invite comment, and being able to listen is a key leadership skill. And what stops critical thinking is fear. We fear speaking up in a meeting. Maybe you're in a meeting and perhaps you see a flaw in the plan, in the proposal that's being put forward, but you don't say anything. And why do you not say anything? It's that fear of being sidelined, the fear of being socially excluded, the fear of perhaps being the one that speaks up. You don't want to look foolish. And we are afraid of social exclusion and of speaking up. And that makes us vulnerable to being manipulated, to being coerced, to being influenced, and being subject to bias. So we have to be aware of our own vulnerabilities in being able to think critically. And the world as you see it is simply the world as you see it. Each of us exists on an island, and we believe, and someone said in a podcast I was listening to you yesterday, wouldn't the world be great if we could persuade everybody to be just like us? This is how we see the world, but in fact, each of us lives on our own island. So what we're needing to do when we see the same events and situations the same is to be able to visit each other's island and asking, how do we build that bridge between my island and your island? So I want to talk about in mediation, which I use to have critical conversations or encourage critical conversations and critical thinking with my clients, the difference between what I call the flawed approach and the alternative approach. And the work that I do as a mediator is in fact called alternative dispute resolution. So the flawed approach I like to talk about is the injection theory. You're lucky I'm not in the room with you, because if I were, I would be bringing my prop, which is an enormous hypodermic syringe. Because the flawed approach is this: we believe that if we have all the facts and the data and the argument, and indeed our own narrative, we can inject that directly into the brain of the others and be the most persuasive and influential, and they will roll over and say, absolutely, I see that you are right and I am wrong. Do you think it works like that? Well, most of the time it doesn't. And in fact, when we adopt the flawed approach, the I'm right and they're wrong, it brings in a level of aggression and adversity into the meeting right from the beginning. When you walk into a challenging meeting and that's your approach, as soon as somebody has a different narrative, a different set of facts and data, you immediately feel attacked and vulnerable. And therefore, your behavior is adversarial, and you set off a chain of events which eventually leads to conflict and dispute. So what's the alternative approach? Oh, before I do that, let me talk about this. The flawed approach leads us to what I call the abyss. And again, before we came on the call this morning, we were talking about how the current situation that we're in globally seems to be leading us into the abyss. But this is true in the boardroom and in the workplace too. So what I say is that if we use the flawed approach, we're going to end up with what I call WMD, weapons of mass destruction, and we all end up in the conflict abyss. The alternative approach is, and it comes from my latest book, which is called The Mole and the Mountain. And the main character of that story is a mole called Morris the Mole. In the book, Morris goes on a journey from a time where he's in a great storm, and he's left with the tree that has been his life, his support and his home for the whole of his life. That tree blows down, and life as he knew it was never going to go back to how it was before. So Morris has to go on a journey out into the light. And in this approach, this alternative approach, I reflect the journey of Morris through a map and through a compass. This approach can be used by you for any dialogue, debate, disagreement, dispute, and so on that you have to work through. And the map actually helps us to say, where do I want to end up? And the compass is a tool that helps to guide us through the different stages of the dialogue, both the internal dialogue and the dialogue that we need to have with others when we're thinking critically. So as I go through this alternative approach, I'd like you to have in mind some situation. It could be the global situation. Maybe there's a situation in your workplace. Maybe you have a boardroom challenge that you would like to think of and run through this process as I guide you through the map and the compass. So the alternative approach then is to ask, what would Morris do? I'll give you a link to the book later, but the question is, what would a mole, and some of the analogies for moles are getting stuck in the dark, not wanting to see the light, digging a hole for themselves. What would Morris do? The Morris that goes on the journey and finds a different way and finds enlightenment, if you like, and transformation, as was introduced. So here's the map. Know the journey and you will know the outcome and you will see the journey. This is the map I use. I can send a copy to anybody who's interested in that because it's quite detailed, but you will see that there's a journey there and lots of different characters. We start with the storm, we move on to the murky swamp of reality, we're going to go over the bridge of courage and then to the mountaintop of experience. But you will see other characters and icons there. The baggage, how much baggage are we carrying? The wrong shoes, have we got the wrong mindset? Have we got the wrong person on our team? There again is the nowhere abyss. And there is, of course, the dragon of doubt. So there are many steps on this journey that I take people through when we are looking at how to think critically and resolve conflict. So here is the process that I use when I'm helping people to think critically. It's a compass, and we talk through 4 stages of the compass. What's happening now? How can we explore more deeply? What are some of the solutions? And how do we walk forwards? Let me take you through those very quickly. Here's the storm. Oops, we've gone a slide too far. Here's the storm. And the questions I want you to ask yourself here is, what is happening now? What is the story or narrative? And importantly, not only what is my story or narrative, but what might other people's story or narratives too? What alternative narratives are there? Because very often we get stuck in our own story or narrative, and in particular, the one we have told ourselves internally, the story we're telling ourselves. But as in my mediation, once you have told others your narrative, as is happening to the parties in my mediation, you are then stuck in a situation where it's very difficult for you to backtrack from that narrative. So it's understanding, what narrative have I told myself? What narrative have I told others? And what alternative narratives might there be? And then think about, what negative outcomes do I fear? So that's stage 1 of the compass. Stage 2 is the place I call the murky swamp of reality. My clients never want to go here because it's a really uncomfortable place. It's the place where none of us want to go because we have to face the brutal truth or reality of our situation, perhaps the situation we're in the world, perhaps the situation we're in our organization or boardroom. So we have to think, what do I need to know to explore more deeply? Is there some data or evidence or facts that I'm ignoring? Is this another narrative that I haven't been prepared to listen to? What further evidence do I need to gather? And then what is your own and others' experience? How can we share what we have experienced to date? How can we tap into our internal sense of what's going on and our intuition? This is a deep phase, and very often this lasts a long time. If we don't dig, and this is where you need to think deeply, differently, and dangerously. If we don't stay in this phase and dig deep enough, we're not going to have what we need to be able to think critically and move forwards. The next stage, having gone through the murky swamp, is to cross the bridge of courage. This is where we think about what possible solutions are there. The danger for us is that, again, our brain likes certainty, and so we tend to think in a linear way. If the problem is A, the solution must be B. But actually, there are often many, many more solutions. So let's develop a whole range of solutions and options. Think about what other suggestions others can make. Are you asking other people for their ideas, for their interpretation, for their narratives, for their solutions? And what do we really need to settle this? In fact, I like to make a distinction between settlement and resolution, because resolution means I can draw a line under this, we can move forward, we don't have to dwell in the past. As one of my great colleagues says, the past is for reference, not for residence. And then it's really important at this stage to know what our criteria or values are. This little signpost sits in the corner of my map, and there are my 4 values: to listen, to learn, to love, and to laugh. And I'll come back to how important humor is in this critical thinking. But when I ask in boards that I chair and take part in, what are your criteria for resolving this, for making this decision? Very often I get met with a puzzled look. So it's important to know what our own values are, what our company values are, what our board values are, and therefore what our criteria are for making the decisions that we're going to make. And so the final phase of the journey that Maurice goes on and that I would take you on is to get to the mountaintop of experience. Now, even when we get to base camp of a mountain, we still have a long way to go. And I would say that the clients I'm currently working with are at a place that I call the dark, deep woods. They've started to climb the mountain, but they've still found that they've hit a kind of roadblock. So be prepared always in critical thinking for a long journey, for deep thinking, for being able to climb that mountain in stages. And what do we need to walk forward? That's the question. What do we need? What do we need from each other? Do we need, for example, in the mediation that I'm just concluding, we need a raft of documents to be able to transfer a company from one person to the other, to be able to satisfy the shareholders, to migrate all the elements of the business. Those are in the process of being drafted right now. So what do we really need to walk forward so that we don't look backwards? Then to think, what have you learnt on this journey? What wisdom have you gained? And now you're at the mountaintop. You can see the whole landscape. That gives us a wider perspective. And it's the wider perspective that enables us to be able to see differently and think critically. So just to wrap up, there's a couple of questions here that do promote critical thinking. How do you know this is true? What are the underlying assumptions of your argument? What's another way for you to look at this? And the biggest one is, what are the larger implications of this decision? I mentioned before we came on again that I've written a blog today thinking about comparisons between farming and AI, but also thinking what are the wider implications of implementing a different approach to the way we both farm our food and farm our ideas, actually. So I would say we live in a world that rewards speed and certainty and slogans, and that critical thinking is something that is not only radical, but it's absolutely essential for us in these really challenging times, because the most powerful speakers are not the loudest. They are the ones that are the most curious, because critical thinking isn't about winning. It isn't about that injection theory. It's about being able to pause and ask better questions, being able to think deeply, differently, and dangerously when the chips are down, and not being afraid of what others think. It's that ability to ask better questions. So I think the map reminds us of the journey we have to go on and the destination we want to reach. But the compass reminds us how we're going to get there. And just a final reminder, there will always be these storms. There are currently many storms in the world, in the workplace, in the boardroom. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, will we meet those challenges with fear or with curiosity? So my challenge that I leave you with is to think deeply, differently, and dangerously, and also to bring with you what I call the three hums: humor, humanity, and humility. These will help us get through the dark times. And remember, only dead fish go with the flow. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jane, for your passion and your incredible storytelling. You are such a breath of fresh air. I think what really resonated with me is how you showed us that critical thinking is not a luxury, it's a necessity for whichever industry you serve in. And I think you mentioned quite a few things: psychological safety, social exclusion, biases, and how we react to differing opinions. And we see those aspects every day. I love the alternative approach, which allows us to be more open-minded. I love the values to listen, to learn, and to love. And I know you use the word compass a few times, and I want to thank you for being our compass for critical thinking this morning. I am going to engage the chat. We do have a hand up from Paul. Paul, over to you.
Oh, sorry, Paul, we can't hear you.
Not
Thanks.
yet.
I got it now.
Hi, Paul.
Thank you, Jane. We heard from one of our leading geopolitical speakers, David Muir, that the world, the future of the world, is actually not in the hands of the linear thinkers as much as it used to be. It's
Yes,
more the problem solvers and the people
yes.
who are. So I think with your talk, we should be taking it seriously. And you really did give us some fundamentals in this short span. So it's clear to us, just from a commercial point of view, it's clear to us that a lot of our customers look for workshops, programs, facilitation, that sort of thing. And that's obvious that you have everything, at the tip of your fingers for that kind of request. When it comes to keynote presentations at conferences, where
Yes.
do you find that you kind of really thrive? Is it more like a sort of a leadership event, or is it a general town hall scenario where people just wanted something different, something to take away from? But where have you found that like you've really landed your message and you walked off stage and thinking, I really enjoyed that? That'd just be a
Well,
question.
I
Oh,
enjoy both actually. I do like the sort of, if you talk about, if you're meaning of a more informal thing with the town hall, that's something I really like, because I like reacting as I am now to sort of being more interactive and more flexible with questions. The keynote, I think, is just a development of this. It works well, and does give people thinking, but I think with this kind of topic, there needs to be something to follow on with, because there's a lot of thinking that people have to process, and I think they need to come back to me. So if I were delivering a keynote, I would probably offer some follow-up sessions or a side workshop or something to enable people to go deeper into this topic, maybe.
lovely, lovely.
Thank
Well,
you, Paul.
thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much for the question, Paul, and thank you, Jane. Jane, before we end and building on to Paul's question, we do have an audience from the events industry, as you know, and I'd love to ask you, in a world that is filled with noise and quick judgments, how can we train ourselves and our teams to slow down and approach problems with more critical thinking, especially when we're under pressure, because there's a lot of pressure in the events industry. So I wanted to ask you that question.
It's so challenging, isn't it? I think for all of us, just how do we just take that pause? I mean, literally, I just ask, what would Morris do? Because it brings me back to, it's having something that anchors you. So anything that anchors you back to taking a pause and thinking, some little thing, because I think we are, as I've said in my blog this morning, I think we're sort of all on conveyor belts at the moment. We feel almost as though we can't take a break or take a pause. And how do we take that pause? How do we take that breath? So sometimes we just need to sort of have something that anchors us and reminds us to slow down and think. Not easy, I think, Melissa, but thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jane. You answered it perfectly. We have two questions from our audience. Brian says, great session, Jane. How do you address the millennial and Gen Z generation as they don't like to be told what to do?
Yeah, I quite agree. So I'm a mother and a grandmother, so I've got various generations in my family, and I'm working out how to communicate with all of them. One of the things I found most interesting with the material that I have developed is that parents are wanting to share it with their younger generation. And so I've only realized this recently, but I'm with the material, and particularly with the map and the mole, it's a bridge between generations because I don't actually believe we should tell people what to do. I believe that the two key principles of mediation are, in fact, fully informed consent and self-determination, making your own mind up. And I think it's really important that young people and indeed people in our workplaces are encouraged to think for themselves. Therefore, this map and the compass enables us to have conversations with young people, which helps them to identify a framework for a conversation and how they make their own decisions without us telling them what to do. I found it very popular, as I say, with parents in that respect.
Thank you so much, Jane. Brian, great question. Really appreciate it. As a Gen Z myself, I hate being told what to do. So, yeah.
So do I.
We do have a question from Kim. It might be the last question I take, unless anyone else has a very burning question. Kim says, how do you facilitate laughter in the group if they are in the dark, deep woods?
Yes, very, very good question. As I say, one of the things I have found that I bring into my work is this sense of humor. It's not about joke telling, it's just about bringing a lightness to the work that I do. And so I think it is just being able to step into that lightness of touch, if you like, where you are open to humor, you're open to laughter, even in some of the deepest, darkest mediations. And I do mediate some very deep, dark situations. I have found that laughter has risen. And again, Maurice the Mole always helps. So he often, I've had him made into a character. He goes with me where I go. He goes in a cat backpack, and I take him around with me. He brings a sense of lightness and helps to break any impasse.
Thank you so much, Jane. I think we will leave it there. I love what you said, just being open to humor, and taking from what you said earlier on, just being open to active listening and being more sensitive, can I say, being more sensitive. Ladies and gentlemen, as we hold on to that, I want to thank each and every one of you for being part of Spark Shift Succeed. Today, this platform is about more than a dialogue. It's about anchoring transformation, sparking new ways of thinking and succeeding with purpose. And as we look ahead, let's remember that next week, Monday, the 27th of April, is Freedom Day here in South Africa. In honor of this important day, we'll not be hosting Spark Shift Succeed. Instead, I invite you to take that time to reflect on the freedoms we enjoy, the responsibilities we carry, and the choices we make to shape the future. We will see you on the 4th of May, which is a Monday at 9 a.m. South African time, with another incredible session with Con British. Have a great week, and thank you so much for joining us. See you soon.